Hi everyone, good afternoon. My name is Kayla Nash, and today we're going to be talking about Brian Washington's stories, Lockwood and Waugh, I believe it's pronounced, from Lot. I did take some notes right here for everyone, and we're gonna speed through these, and I'm just gonna glance over at these every so often. But yeah, so I want to get into some of the ideas that I took down from the stories and some of the reoccurring and overlapping ideas, such as those of family, friendship, and belonging. One of the things that really stood out to me in these stories is that Washington does not present his family as something that is simple or just this perfect idea of what your family is supposed to look like. And instead, he shows that as a complicated or complex structure. It can be a source of love, but it can also be about pain, expectations, conflict, just things that I feel like would happen in any household, but wouldn't happen in your perfect household, if that makes any sense. One interesting idea I took from it, or I'll get into it a little bit later in one of the quotes that I took down, but one of the interesting ideas that I got from it, or a question that both stories I feel like ask is, what does it mean to care about someone or to care for someone if caring for them doesn't solve the problem? If love doesn't fix it, what can, if that makes any sense? Because in both of the stories, though the characters are trying to survive, and I feel like all the people around them become their support system. Their relationships are messy because people are messy, and you can't really control that. In Lockwood, the narrator's relationship is centered really around his family and their responsibilities because after his father leaves, he becomes increasingly more dependent, or at least his family becomes more dependent on one another, especially with the restaurant and his mom. And it's almost like I call it community imperative in a lot of cases, but it's almost like he feels as if he can't leave because everyone else in his life is already left. His sister leaves to create her own life. Javi joins the military, and eventually the responsibility of staying behind falls on him no matter what. So that's where that kind of like family imperative comes in, or whatever. And that's where the quote quote, love was a verb comes from. I think that line really explains the narrator's mindset. And for him, love is not necessarily about saying things or expressing emotions. It's about staying put, maybe a sense of loyalty. Because love is about working and love is about sacrificing something for someone else or whatever. But see, the problem with this type of love and the complications of this love is that, in a way, it traps him. Because having this type of love means that leaving your mom or is abandoning your mom and essentially saying that you don't love her. And so, therefore, he had to give up a lot of opportunities for himself. And all a part of basically seeing love as a responsibility and not realizing that love also means having a life for yourself or doing things for yourself. So, and I feel like that connects also a lot to the refugee story that we was reading because in many of those stories, the family members make sacrifices because of the circumstances that are out of their control or what have you. Because of the outside factors of the world, I feel like in a lot of the stories, characters often carry lots of responsibilities because of the war, immigration, the need to survive, just innate things that we need. And I feel like family is something that people like to hold on to because it becomes something that it really doesn't go away, especially with your legacy and with creating a family and things like that. So I guess in some cases it also creates a sense of like pressure because both Washington and I don't want to say the name wrong, show that love and hardship often exist together, if that makes any sense. I really enjoy Waugh because I feel like Washington shifts the idea of family from biological family and the people that you're born with to more of like a chosen family because Poke and the other boys, they're not related by blood, but they create a kind of family by being dependent on each other and just having loyalty. And I feel like that's actually very common in black communities as well. Their apartment even, it's not a traditional home, but it becomes a place that has rules, routines, and protection because they keep each other safe. And I feel like that is a running theme that is also commonly seen, and it's a complicated like side of friendship, because on one hand he's like this controlling dude. Rod is this controlling dude who's making these rules, and he's taking rent from people, and he's being violent when people push him. But on the other hand, this is the person that you rely on for protection, and the person who's essentially supposed to be providing for you. So I feel like it's like complicated, and I feel like he almost goes out his way to find people who need help, to give them a place to stay, keep food in the apartment, and try to keep them from danger, almost at a small cost, but a cost nonetheless. And I also feel like Washington makes a point of like not painting, not necessarily painting, but not labeling Rod as a good or bad person, because he can be caring at the same time as being harmful. And that's almost the complexity of it, if that makes sense. Because that's where the ideas of love and friendship can be complicated and whatnot. And I feel like that is in itself inserts a lot of ambiguity. Sorry. That states a certain amount of that only because the characters are constantly negotiating, is this who I'm supposed to be? Is different expectations, is this what I'm supposed to allow? So I felt like that was probably the most interesting of the stories that we've read. Oh my God. All right. So in Lockwood, I will say that that was a very big example for me of almost like a, I would say masculinity, but also like a toxic masculinity, because I feel like Javi represents what a traditional man was supposed to look like in society. And I feel like he teaches the narrator how to play basketball, teaches him how to be tough, and he just believes that men should handle things in a certain way. But at the same time, that same masculinity is what prevented him from accepting his brother when his brother essentially came, or when the narrator essentially came out. And it's complicated because Javi's not presented as someone who didn't love his brother. He taught him things, he protects him, he takes the blame for things, writes letters home. Like, you can sense that there's like genuine love between him. But when the narrator finally opens up about his sexuality, he responds violently, obviously. And this is painful because I feel like the narrator spent years wanting his brother to truly see him, and I feel like it was almost hinted to. And I remember, where's the quote I wrote down? It's, I feel like it stood out to me, and it says, I watched Javi's face for something to click or contort or scrunch itself into oblivion, but it did not. It did not happen. And that moment really bothered me because the narrator is not just revealing about himself. He's trusting Javi with a part of himself that he's been afraid to share all of this time. And he's hoping that his brother's love will be stronger than the expectations that was placed on him. But instead, he reacted obviously in a physical manner. And I feel like that just hit me. Especially when he said, and I didn't feel when he slapped me. In writing it, it's almost like he's emotionally detached from the moment. It's not just a physical slap, but it's deeper than realizing that the person that he wanted acceptance from may not be capable of giving it due to the outside factors. And I feel like that's just my hot take, because I feel like Washington refuses to make it simple. It would really be easy to just say Javi's the bad guy, boom, he didn't accept his brother, but it doesn't do that. Javi is someone who loves his brother, and his brother hurts him. I feel like two things can be true at once when his brother was really just trying to be himself, and that's the hard part about it. And I feel like that was a great way to connect back to the larger messages about family, because sometimes the people who loved us are shaped by harmful ideas that still essentially end up hurting us. Javi's been taught a very narrow version of masculinity, and when his brother challenges that version, he doesn't know how to respond. So, and I feel like Waugh explores similar questions, but through like friendship and the chosen family idea. Because Polk's relationship with Rod shows that love does not always mean saving someone. Polk wants to help Rod after he becomes sick, but Rod refuses because that will mean accepting and admitting to his vulnerability. And I think that Washington is showing that relationships are built through imperfect people formed by imperfect ideas. Polk, Rod, Javi, and the narrator all make mistakes. They all want connection, but they don't know how to create maybe a healthy version of it. Overall, though, I think both stories challenge traditional ideas of family and friendship because they show that family is not always defined by blood and friendships are not always simple. Sometimes family is the person who stays, and sometimes it's the person who gives you a place to sleep. And sometimes it's the person who hurts you all while still loving you. I feel like the stories challenge the traditional conservative Texas values by showing that people do not always fit into the expectations. His characters, unlike many people of the area, are queer, working class immigrants, and children of immigrants, people living outside of the traditional values of what others would deem success. But he does not write them as people who do not belong. He writes them as people who are part of the community still. And for me, I feel like the biggest takeaway for both stories is that belonging is complicated. People are constantly negotiating who they are, who they're expected to be, who they actually want to become. And I feel like Washington doesn't give us easy answers. And I think that's what makes the stories powerful. They show that love, family, and friendship can be messy, but that's some of the things that help people survive. So, thank you for listening.